Wake Up Radio Network.
A rational voice in a world of conspiracy. Jim Duke perspective.
Hey, I want to thank you for listening. Welcome again. And Darren's off. He's got a task to take care of. And so he got called to duty. So I'm going solo this time. And, you know, we've had some controversial subjects in the past. And I'm probably going to relate some things to you, not here on the podcast, because it's just that it's too dividing to put on the air. I'm getting a lot of flack for certain things, and I don't want to cause any more issues or trouble. So I'm going to put it out on a private message and send it out to the patrons on the Patreon page. If you want to subscribe to Patreon, I'm there, Jim Duke Perspective, and that's where you can help pledge to keep the show running. We're bringing more rational information, and I hope that we're latching on to listeners that want more of that and some of the biblical issues. But for the most part, we relate things that are happening with the New World Order, with the Illuminati, and things like that, because it's still going on. Let's face it. But I don't believe like I used to, that we're waiting for all these things to happen. I do believe there's still some future incidences, some things that must come, or some things that are warned about. But those are the things for the end of the time, for the finality of things. As far as the end of the age, I believe that when Jesus was talking about wars and rumors of wars, today if I said, hey, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, what would you say? You'd say, oh, okay, well, there is wars and rumors. There has been wars of rumors and rumors of wars since at least the 20th century, 19th century, but definitely the 20th century, ever since even the United States, America was here. But even more so, worse now. But when you say the end times will come when there's wars and rumors of wars, you got to remember, how much more do you need? Well, it's going to be prominent. Okay, well, if you're in the Middle East, you're hearing those sirens go all the time. It's very prominent to them. They would have thought in 1967 there was a war for them, the end times. You know, Israel was bombed and Jerusalem and, what's that, the 7-Day War or whatever it is. So it's always been from our history in this modern day. So what would be significant to make you understand wars and rumors of wars worse? People say, oh, it's going to be worse wars. Really? Here's what happened in Matthew 24. I said I wasn't going to talk about this. Way back when, wars and rumors of wars, when Jesus said that, it was significant. Why? Because it was during Pax Romana, the peace treaty of Rome, where they declared no war between the nations. And when Jesus says there's going to be war, that was significant because they weren't supposed to see it. And they did have wars, the Roman-Jewish wars. There was blood on the streets. Josephus testifies to that. The Jews that didn't escape, that stayed to fight, didn't know that they were supposed to flee to the mountain like Jesus warned. So Rome took over. They slaughtered. They took over Jerusalem. They turned every stone of Jerusalem. That was basically the end of that age. Now today we continue, and we're playing on this same narrative, but now it's every year. And, it was every century. Now it's every year. It seems more and more people predict September. That's the end of the year. That's the tribulation, the end of the day, the end of the days, whatever. October, we have dates of October 5th. I've heard October 7th. I'm not keeping track of these things, but I'm seeing ridiculous claims that tribulation started. Why? Well, because they sense it by the events. They're fitting the events into their interpretation, and now they're saying this must be the time when Israel will go to war and Armageddon and all this stuff, and the tribulation starts. Well, there's a problem with that. Jesus said in Matthew 24, this generation will not pass. And I believe he's speaking to the generation he was speaking to. Not speaking to them about us, but speaking to them about them. And their generation didn't, it didn't go unnoticed. Their situation happened before the end of their generation. A generation in the Bible is 40 years. So if you're saying the modern generation today will see this, it has to happen in a generation, then you're mistaken, because 1948 was when Israel became a nation. They say that marked the timepiece, and 40 years, the limit would be 1988. Why you have books, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture has to happen by 1988. Well, one of the reasons is because it's within a generation. And what happened in 1989? Skipped over a generation, went into a new age. And now they're trying to say that the generation was 70 years. They reinterpreted a generation because they knew that was the sign. Jesus says, in this generation, you'll see this. So they said, well, the wars and rumors of wars we're talking about for tribulation has to be within 70 years. What happened in 2018, 70 years later, then Israel, the timepiece? Nothing. Just same wars that we've had, rumors of wars. Nothing significant. Therefore, the rapture didn't start in that generation. So now, even though Jesus says this generation, futurist prophecy is still insisting that it's a future time that we're going to see the things happening in Matthew 24. Stop it. It's over. The generation is over. It couldn't have been this generation because this generation's passed while Israel and Jerusalem were active. When back then, it was very active. And upon the abomination of desolation, Jerusalem was laid trodden. And today, Jerusalem exists again. They're making it go a second time. So every time Israel gets in a war, they predict, okay, this is it. This is the tribulation. New tribulation dates, new timepieces, but you're forgetting one thing. You're not counting it from the actual count that Jesus said, this generation. Now you're into a different generation. So that's my reasons, my quick reasons why I am not a pre-tribulation rapture guy, and I think that these wars are evident of just people and their greediness and bringing on a new world order, which may be a culmination of bringing it down to the final times when maybe there's a final battle. I don't know. I'm not going to claim to be an eschatology major, but there are things in Revelation maybe that need to come about. I just know it's not Matthew 24. At least I don't think it's Matthew 24. I think that happened. So I think all the prophecies to the Jews were fulfilled in that time for them because it was a transition, end of the age of the old covenant into the new covenant. And now we're seeing these things popping up. Wars and stuff will happen. People are subjective to rule, and there's people subjective to ruling. Many rise up to rule over the masses. This is how it's been since the beginning of time. It's seemingly keeping together a society, but it's actually merely control. And the masses, it's natural for them to want to be ruled. I don't know. They want a government over them. Look at all those kingdoms. Even the Jews demanded a king. They were given a pagan king because they demanded it. And Babylon, they were under the slavery of Babylon. And a lot of the prophecies, by the way, were to do with Babylon. And Mystery Babylon is just a continuation, spiritual continuation of that. The elite, though, I don't think they want a revolution so much. They want to rule with an eye towards benevolence to appease the people. However, with the eventual purpose to dictate and rule over them. And we see in the Bible, 1 Peter 5, I want to bring up this one because this is one that's prevalent in the churches. You've got pastors that are taking over altars and standing in front of the people on top of platforms, altars, and they're ruling over them with their church, and they're claiming to be the one that's in charge. And they'll say they're not in charge, God is, but then they take charge. It's not their church, but it's their church because they put the time and effort into building it. But they want to rule, and the people want a ruler. So in 1 Peter 5, it warns shepherds are to shepherd their flock. They're to come alongside, nurture them. And it says not to lord it over, not for filthy lucre, because there's men when they're in position to take owners or rulership over people, they tend to get haughty about it, and they tend to act like they're it. And it's not to rule over people. It's not to gain filthy money and to do that job. James 4:2 says that they war because they're greedy. So war is because of greed. It's because of lust, the lust of greed, and nothing's good enough for the wealthy. They just want to get wealthier. Psalm 2, it talks about those that are over others. And it says, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? By the way, that's translated, why do the people rage and the people conspire? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. So they're planning to oppress. They're planning to control and rule. This is the nature of man, but definitely the nature of man in his all his arrogance and pridefulness. Micah 2 says, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it's in their power of their hands. They covet fields, they take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. So they have the power of war and the violence, and they take and plummet people, and they oppress men. And a lot of times they oppress men through government, through taxations, through sometimes giving out benefits but having something in return. We have a certain form of rulerships. We have monarchs. They have dynasties. They acquired land by conquering. And a lot of times the royal families came from Vikings and warriors, believe it or not. They dominated regions. And then we had emperors over empires, people of prestigious influence that rose above others with ideas, and they gained leverage to have a military backing to rule over others. And these were your kings and other things in certain nations and rulers. And the people served as laborers and peasants. The dynasties were basically royal families of wealth and influence who would run the kingdoms and set the order. And then civilized societies gained ground with land opportunities, having set governments that would enact policies, cultures, and laws, and rules that those in it would follow or be imprisoned by their own courts. And these governments were to keep the order, but they're run by oligarchies, a few of the elite. We have, underneath that, we have secret societies. And secret societies learned how to initiate, to hold their secrets under their councils, leaning the inner workings and gaining knowledge of how things worked to have an inner circle influence. But mostly it was to operate stealth so that they could form esoteric groups that would have knowledge of things that the masses wouldn't. So the masses were outside the know. And sometimes even the elite outside their circles wouldn't be in the esoteric circles of knowledge. So they had a certain ranking, certain prestige. The Illuminati came aboard 1776, and they rivaled the royal monarchs to win over the governments of the nations. That way they can easily control the masses and control the nations by controlling the wealth of the nation. That's what Amschel Mayer Bauer said before he changed his last name, the surname, to Rothschild's, Red Shield. He said, I care not about the rules, the laws of the nations. I will own the wealth of the nation, and I'll make the laws. And people would serve as the oppressive work labor. They're the work labor force. And the Illuminati formed reasons for wars and revolutions because it would stir the pot and give more leverage to these elite bankers. And the nations would rely on them for loans to rebuild, for weapons and defense, rebuilding the infrastructure, borrowing to upscale, and they intended a new world order. Now, along the way, civilized society became more developed with the Industrial Revolution that enhanced production, and it gave work to those that were just the measly peasants who, were citizens. Farms could be produced more massively, and more goods or more products could be made in a factory rather than by hand. So it kind of could have put the individual family markets out of business, so to speak. And in return, they say, well, why don't you just come work for our factories, our manufacturing plants? So the people ended up working for these manufacturing plants, and it became the hub of business. They were given a livelihood in trade of their labor. But reality, they just, instead of serving the oligarchy kingdom, they're now serving the corporation. And industry was developed by wealth. It was developed by the bankers, which were made up of the elite oligarchy, powerful, and the people dependent on that power. And the government was run by those who held the power of wealth, and people in positions would be bought out by them to enact policies that are beneficial to the state. A lot of the times, the corporations or the elite ran the governments. I mean, you see the government of Africa, the government of India. It was owned by the East India British Company, and then later the chapter from the British government. But it was run like a business, just like they say America, United States of America, incorporated. We gave our pledge like a business, a federal or international business with a federal government, but that federal government has fractions inside it. Like our currency is governed by the private banking organization called the Federal Reserve. It's not the United States Reserve, it's the Federal Reserve. It's not federal as part of our government. It's the banks that are in control of the mint. So they can plummet the economy as they will. The bankers can anyway, at least using the Federal Reserve, who control the flow of currency. But anyway, the governments would enact policies beneficial to them, and they're throwing bones to the people to prevent revolt if at all possible. And the U.S. was influential in this with the wealth from bankers like J.P. Morgan, Warburg, and the Rockefellers, as well as collaboration with the Rothschilds to build the industrial military complex and the industrialized civilization. In the background was an intent to rein in the people, narrow down the influence of rivaling nations, and creating the need for a central bank. They built a global structure that equalized the playing field and stripped away the conditions of the people until they would beg for dependency. And they did away with national sovereignty as much as possible. They chipped away at it. But again, wars became the chaotic instrument to bring nations to their knees and to make the citizens more dependent on the government. There's a couple sayings that publishing was propaganda, of course, we know, the press. and Hearst owned a big majority of the press. And one time he told one of his illustrators, I want you to portray war. And he sent his illustrator out, and his illustrator said, there's nothing to report. And Hearst says, you just make the war up, report on it, and we'll make it happen. In other words, propaganda fueled the fire. And I remember that we had Operation Northwoods, which was a conspiracy to false flag Cuba in order to pin actions here in the United States on Cuba so that it had an excuse to attack Cuba because they needed the compliance of the people. You need the backing of the people in order to go for war. I don't think they care about that anymore, but the propaganda serves that. It has the people on your side. Well, yeah, they do that still. Israel is a good example. Israel, they say Israel is the chosen of God. Israel is innocent. They're our allies. Therefore, they're going to war. We need to fund them. So half our budget goes to defense dome, whatever it's called, for Israel and weapons and help them fight the war. They can't fight it without us. So America's all behind that. Go, Israel. War, war, war. We're rooting war on. Can you imagine that? We want war. So we're actually starting wars and rumors of wars. It's not biblical. It's not like, I mean, we're calling for it ourselves. But Marxism is an outline for globalism, and it failed because the people recognized communism as a bad thing. But I believe it was used as a test, beta test, in order to give doses of exaggerated policies to create more obvious communism, to divide the chasm between extreme communism and mild communism, which actually is socialism. So in its place, little by little, they devised policies to spoon feed the sectors into accepting doses of socialism that would give regulation powers to the state while giving the illusion of freedom. The industry would become more a socialist, globalist entity, and then eventually be controllable to sway the people into accepting socialism. Because communism was viewed as bad back in my day. Socialism, well, just the redistribution of goods and services through taxes wasn't as bad. It was mild. But now you talk to people and communism isn't even really a bad word. People say, well, it's just socialism. Oh, and that's okay. But the leaders also need us conditioned to accept it. So thanks to the Ivy League schools, they mentored the people in prestigious power. Now, the elite didn't need war all the time. A lot of times now the war is in propaganda. It's in our minds. It's on us. It's conditioning us. There's still war going on, but they take the opportunity for chaos to direct towards their order, and they have a saying in the Freemasons, ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. So they believe that they're bringing their order out of chaos. And it's written in Freemason circles that the Freemasons desire to rule the governments, rule the society, rule the nations. That's their secret plan, and they want to bring order to it. But eventually, even the chaos is not just chaos that's naturally happening. It's planned chaos to stage a trauma so people would remain in fear and dependency, and then eventually accepting the offer of the globalism or centralized government or socialism or one worldism, whatever you want to call it, the New World Order. And recently, we've been spoon-fed the ideas of this direction by the way of indoctrination in the media, propaganda and such, but also through scenarios that inch us towards it. The terrorism is an excuse for more surveillance. Technology is an excuse for more connection and monitoring of us. And new policies have conditioned citizens to accept the social order. And then we have talk of a new reset, a great reset, proposed by the WEF at the Davos conferences, speaking of Marxist ideas. No privacy, no possessions, but you'll be happy. but how to implement them. Well, some suspect that the whole pandemic was a vehicle to cause change. Our society was shifted after the pandemic to accept these new policies, and our social life, we have to admit, was altered. And if you understand the necessary need for change to conform, magic is defined as the change in conformity to will. They're using magic on us. And now if you look at the same players that are at top of these policies that have the wealth to buy influence to enact them, we see that they're involved in this. Now, part of our suspicions are in this scenario that was developed, outlined by the Rockefeller family, by the Rockefellers. And it was under a portion of the Rockefellers' brochure, Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. There's a section called Lock Step. And in it, it's leading a scenario for a pandemic upon the public, which is imagined world in the future sometime where national governments imposed a strict top-down control and authority in response to a global pandemic with citizens complying with government restrictions. Sound familiar? Incidentally, this lockstep outline was published in 2010. And it was given a scenario in the future around 2020. Isn't that coincidental? You have to say it's got to be more than coincidence. Articles by a friend of ours, Lori Swan, and also Ralph Epperson, another friend of ours, made USA Today examination in a rebuttal against the claim that the Rockefellers planned the pandemic. So there was rebuttal to their claims that the Rockefellers had this planned in 2010. But despite the rebuttals and the criticism towards these attacks on the Rockefellers' lockstep, saying they have nothing to do with the pandemic, despite their denial and the fact check claims, the booklet by the Rockefellers shares a very coincidental exact outline of what we experienced with the pandemic attempt to control us with mechanisms of compliance towards authoritarian government. So how can you say this was coincidental when all the outline kind of lays out? The article claims outlining 3 phases that we could be towards phase 3 in fortifying the authoritarian regime if we let them dictate us into this fear that they have. We had the lockdowns, we had distancing, we had masks, vaccine mandates, and then other arbitrary restrictions until they loosened up. But these are all written in the outlines. So how can you say it's coincident? It's not the same. It wasn't written for this. Well, it's written for a planning of a pandemic just like we had, even giving the roundabout date that it happened. It's incredible how close it is. And I think it was led up due to the reluctancy of citizens to follow completely, so they lowered the standards and to avoid a revolt. But I don't know if they really planned on going all the way at this time. I think it was a beta test. But places like New York City and certain individuals still carry on these restrictions in their liberal socialist pockets. Because I know people in New York City, they still insist on having shots. They still insist on distancing. Some are wearing masks still. I mean, they're very liberal. But in the lockstep booklet, it literally says a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. Why can't we believe that it's literally an outline for the future progress? It's following it. We have reports from the WEF of this intent to control, even giving health jurisdiction to the WHO, enforcing compliance with its mandates as it seems fit. And the media is used for propaganda. The media is pushing an alert about the bird flu now and any other label they can pose as a potential viral threat to make the case that the government needs to step in for more authority. However, there's experts saying that there's no transmission of bird flu to humans, so the threat doesn't exist as resulting from it. Yeah, the experts aren't following this. Not all of them. The propaganda is. So all they really need is propaganda, and we'll follow it because we don't know better. We watch the news. You're not listening to shows like this and other shows out there that are kind of bringing you the rationalism. We're not even bringing you whistleblowing information all the time. I'm not even bringing you hype or speculation. I'm telling you what they're doing. I'm telling you what their stuff reads, and I'm just linking it to what's going on so you see it. That's all I'm doing. And you know, they're not relying on us being taken seriously because we're only in our little inner circles. We're only in our little inner community. So they're not feeling threatened by us yet. But more and more people are latching onto it, and they're realizing that the government's not doing what they say. They're not carrying through. They're putting more restrictive mandates on people. Frankly, they're getting sick and tired of it. I think people are finding this out. And some are getting upset. And while we resist, we show a little bit of resistance, they have to pull back a little. Because the more they push, the more they make themselves obvious. And I think they did that during the pandemic. But they want to slowly approach. And that's why I'm I'm very interested in what Carol Quigley, professor of Georgetown Jesuit University, said in his writing of Tragedy and Hope. He blew the whole plan. He admitted the whole plan. He says, yeah, they start wars. Yeah, the wealthy are in charge. Yeah, the bankers are in charge. Yeah, socialism is their plan. But what's taking them so long? That was his gripe. He says, my problem isn't the plan. My problem is why are they taking so long? He said, I've seen their secret papers. I've seen the round table. I know their influence. I've been amongst them. What's taking so long? That was his problem. And maybe he didn't understand they don't want to revolt if they can help it. I mean, Warburg once said, we will have a world government whether you like it or not. It's just a matter of whether consent or conquest. I think the conquest is on paper. I think it's basically like the restrictions and the policies and the propaganda. They don't need to have war on us anymore. But if need be, they'll rise up a revolt so they have an excuse to bring military action. But I don't know. Do they have a military that would come against the citizens? They have to follow the leader, but I think some of the military would kind of step out and maybe say something, but they're under orders. I don't know if they can. All they need is 30%, though, to cause a rouge to break away and revolt against this government. But they don't think they can ever get 30% of the population on their side, so they will never go rogue. That's the problem. So we're stuck with what we got. But we can resist. We can tell them what we don't like. But by rights, we can redress government. We can go in and call it quits. Tell them to get up off your seats. Will the citizens do that? I don't know. There's enough people out there that are ticked off, but I don't think there's enough people that they have on their side for confidence that they can do it. So I think there's a pushback there. I think that's what the elite are going to rely upon, and also about the fear. And you got even so many in the truther community and the Christian community Every time there's a war calling for fear. Oh, this is it. Tribulation, fear. Sell all your goods. Stop working. Run. And I think it's hindering people's growth. I think it's hindering your occupations. And, people are giving up because they're thinking the end is here now. It could be, but don't just throw away your life because it might be. Every war that comes upon you, you'd be going crazy since 1800s. Every time there's something going on, oh, this is it. This is the end. Sell my house. Or you don't have to sell your house because you're not going to care about the money. Just give your house away. There's groups that used up all their money because they thought this was the end times. And they didn't want to have a holding because they thought it was sin to have a holding. So people were selling off their money, giving it away, selling it, getting rid of their money. And then what did their bank accounts show? Well, nothing happened the next day, so I guess they're out of luck. Hey, I'll open up a bank account. Anybody that wants to take heed of the warnings of the prophecies of a rapture date, I'll send your money in my account. Make a pledge and send your money that way. And I'll take your money if you want to be foolish enough to part with it and think that you're not going to need it. You can't give it back, though. I can't get it back, though. Sorry. Once you give it, I got to keep it. All right. Anyway, enough silliness. My website, JimDukePerspective.com. Check it out and subscribe to us on the social media. I'm not on YouTube as much, and sometimes I post on BitChute. Sometimes I just post shorts or trailers on YouTube because they don't like my buzzwords. But you can find me on all the social medias. God bless. We'll see you next time.